said the messenger.
"Then thou art the spokesman, old grey-beard. Have we not heard of thee at whiles and of thy wanderings, ever hatching plots and mischief at a safe distance? But this time thou hast stuck out thy nose too far, Master Gandalf. And thou shalt see what comes to him who sets his foolish webs before the feet of Sauron the Great."
Did Sauron know what the wizards were, or their true purpose in Middle-earth? The wizards were not men or elves, but Maiar, sent to assist the peoples of Middle-earth against the threat of Sauron, all while cloaked in the flesh of men. Sauron, as a Maiar, shared the same origin as the wizards. But how much did he know about them? Was he aware of what Gandalf and the others were beneath the surface? This video will explain what Tolkien tells us about Sauron's understanding, or lack of understanding, of the Istari, and the true reason they crossed the Great Sea from the Blessed Realm. Let's give some background for the wizards. The Istari, or wizards, are apparently 5 in number, though Unfinished Tales speaks of their number being unknown. Gandalf the Grey, who later becomes Gandalf the White, Saruman the White, who later boasts of being Saruman of many colours, Radagast the Brown, and the Blue Wizards, referenced in Unfinished Tales as Alatar and Palando. The wizards were said to have arrived in Middle-earth around the year 1000 of the Third Age, though in another draft, the Blue Wizards, known in those notes as Mori Netar and Romistamo, are thought to have arrived as early as the Second Age. They are Maiar in nature, but were sent in real bodies of men to unite the enemies of Sauron in love and understanding, should he come again to dominate and corrupt. Emissaries they were from Lords of the West, the Valar, who still took counsel for the governance of Middle-earth, and when the shadow of Sauron began first to stir again, took this means of resisting him. For with the consent of Eru, they sent members of their own high order, but clad in bodies as of men, real and not feigned, but subject to the fears and pains and weariness of earth, able to hunger and thirst and be slain, though because of their noble spirits they did not die, and aged only by the cares and labours of many long years. The mouth of Sauron at the Black Gate makes Gandalf aware that Sauron knows of him, his wanderings, hatching plots and mischief, apparently at a safe distance. We also know that Sauron has been in communication with Saruman through the Palantir of Orthanc. What does Tolkien tell us about Sauron's understanding of them? In Myths Transformed, Tolkien explains that if Sauron thought about the Istari, he would think of them, especially Gandalf and Saruman, as emissaries of the Valar. Their purpose in Middle-earth was lost on Sauron, with the Dark Lord believing they were in Middle-earth without the blessing of Eru Ilúvatar, all for the purpose of establishing a presence for the Valar once again in Middle-earth, who had long ago left its shores to dwell in Aman. It would be an effort to colonize, with Sauron truly believing that the Elder King, Manwë, and his wisdom would have the same motives as Sauron, meaning he would act in the same way. This meant that Sauron was completely justified in his belief of Saruman's role in Middle-earth as the clear head or chief of this order. Basically, with Sauron believing himself to be wise, he would believe others who were wise would act just as he would. With Gandalf acting so differently when compared with Saruman, this would be because he was less intelligent and lacked a firm purpose, being only slightly cleverer than Radagast the Brown, as Gandalf was absorbed in the study of people over animals. This, is one reason why Sauron understands and can corrupt Saruman so efficiently, because the White Wizard acts in a similar way to how Sauron himself would act. The wizard then becoming understandable and, more importantly, useful. As the head of the Order, Saruman would be acting in the way that Sauron believed represented the purpose of the Order in Middle-earth. If he thought about the Istari, especially Saruman and Gandalf, he imagined them as emissaries from the Valar, seeking to establish their lost power again and colonize Middle-earth as a mere effort of defeated imperialists without knowledge or sanction of Eru. His cynicism, which sincerely regarded the motives of Manwë as precisely the same as his own, seemed fully justified in Saruman. Gandalf he did not understand, but certainly he had already become evil, and therefore stupid, enough to imagine that his different behaviour was due simply to weaker intelligence and lack of firm masterful purpose. He was only a rather cleverer Radagast. Cleverer because it is more profitable, more productive of power, to become absorbed in the study of people than of animals. When Tolkien wrote this, he seemed to consider that Sauron understood the wizards had come from Valinor as emissaries of the powers of the West, the Valar. This hints that he knew their true nature. It should be noted though that an emissary of the Valar does not always mean a Maia. Remember, Glorfindel the elf was also considered to be an emissary of the Valar, and while he held power nigh as great as the Maiar, he was still an elf in nature. But Sauron would surely know enough about his own order and the other races to determine that Gandalf and the Istari could not be anything other than beings similar in nature to himself. They shared no features of the elves, and clearly presented themselves closer to the race of men. However, their longevity meant that they couldn't be men, as they dwelt in Middle-earth for thousands of years, and the rings of power that could provide such longevity were all accounted for. They also could not be dwarves for the same reason, and due to their appearance. Logic leads to the conclusion that they were of the West, and I suspect that with Sauron's lack of action or fear in stopping them, he would not believe any of them were of the Valar themselves. As said, Sauron had a better understanding of Saruman, which put Sauron at an advantage, as he would know he was greater than Saruman. Knowing he was the greater and able to daunt the so-called greatest of the wizards, at least the one he thought was the greatest, would lead Sauron to underestimating the others, believing they couldn't get in the way of his own plans. Sauron's own imagination was severely limited, due to him always considering his own motives as the most logical or sound. Gandalf becomes one that the Dark Lord does not understand or want to understand, dismissing him and failing to realise that the Grey Pilgrim was the far greater threat to his plans over the wizard Saruman, whom he managed to daunt through the Palantir. I also think that Sauron would be aware of what Gandalf was, due to his own interactions with Saruman. When the hobbit, Pippin, uses the Palantir cast from Orthanc, after Saruman is removed from the Order of the Istari by Gandalf, he communicates with Sauron by accident, and the Dark Lord is angry that Saruman has not been in contact.
I tried to get away because I thought it would fly out, but when it had covered all the globe, it disappeared. Then he came. He did not speak, so that I could hear words. He just looked, and I understood. So you have come back. Why have you neglected the reports for so long? I did not answer. He said, "Who are you?" It hurt me horribly, and he pressed me, so I said, Hobbit.
Sauron and Saruman must have spoken many times, and it was through the Palantir that Saruman was overwhelmed by the might of Sauron, the Greater Will. It is possible that throughout all their time in contact, that Sauron would have been able to extract knowledge or gain an awareness of the inherent power of the one he was speaking to, understanding him more and more with each exchange, breaking down his will. Could or would Saruman shield his origin from Sauron, one he wished in his heart to defeat and replace? He was a traitor to the White Council and Sauron. He may have willingly shared information about being sent by the Valar, but this is obviously pure speculation, as there is no evidence of this in the text. I am confident in saying that with Sauron seemingly in control of Saruman in his own mind, he would have felt that the emissaries of the Valar were now powerless to stop him. With Sauron aware that he was the greatest power in Middle-earth, he was judging his opposition solely on status over some ability to trouble him, being correct about what the Istari were, but wrong about their true purpose in Middle-earth. The fall of Saruman would have then helped Sauron reach his incorrect conclusions. We know that the Istari were not in Middle-earth to colonize or gain power, at least in their original purpose, but were there to aid its people. The relationship between Saruman, Gandalf and Sauron is then one that can be examined through the exchange between Saruman and Gandalf after the latter has returned to Middle-earth following his death. I speak about Gandalf's death in more detail in my video, Did Gandalf the Grey Die?
Saruman, said Gandalf, still laughing. Saruman, you missed your path in life. You should have been the king's jester and earned your bread and stripes too by mimicking his counselors. Ah, me. He paused, getting the better of his mirth. Understand one another. I fear I am beyond your comprehension. But you, Saruman, I understand now too well.
This whole exchange tells me a lot about the relationship. Sauron and Saruman were both of the Valar Aule's people, sharing motives and understanding. Perhaps they even shared a similar nature in many ways, even if one was the greater spirit of the two. What they also share is a lack of understanding when it comes to the figure Gandalf. Gandalf simply does not invest so much into positions of power and authority over others, seeking to understand them over ruling them, which would have Saruman and Sauron view him as weak, when in reality it means just the opposite. Gandalf the White understands Sauron and calls him a wise fool, wisely unleashing a greater force to crush the West, hoping to utterly defeat his strongest enemies in one swoop. In militaristic terms, it made sense, as he was far stronger in that regard. A fool, because having patience and holding his position, guarding his realm of Mordor, would not only save his armies, but make it impossible to destroy the One Ring in the fires of Mount Doom. Sauron does not believe anyone can or will destroy it, but fears others will use it, demonstrating again that he can only come to conclusions based on what he would do. He is then forced into action prematurely. Saruman would have done the same as Sauron, both being wise fools. Gandalf is unlike either of them, and if Sauron had any understanding of Gandalf beyond what he was in nature, then he would have made a far greater effort into stopping him before he was at the Black Gate of Mordor with Aragorn, the new hope for the race of men. I can then say that Sauron understood and misunderstood the Istari, and especially Gandalf. he recognized Gandalf as an emissary, a Maya, but failed to recognize him as the prime mover in his downfall.